Assalamu alaikum. I'm Fasih,
And I'm Laura.
and welcome to the Theology Side Quest. We are in episode 4 of our series of prophets' teaching, and so we're going to continue our discussion, and we are going to talk about Abraham.
This one is going to be a big one. We've actually been kind of looking forward to this one because Abraham obviously is a starting point for multiple traditions. So this one's going to be, we're trying to contain ourselves. There's a lot here.
So Abraham is really the foundation of like 3 of these religions, right? Quote unquote. You like to say that. I don't like to say that Abrahamic faiths.
Well, and do you see what I did there? I did not say the Abrahamic religions.
But I did it for you. So it's like he's a significant factor in terms of what is taught and the way it is taught, right? So we're going to look at, really, there are like 2 separate periods of Abraham's life. There's Abraham from pre-migration into Haran and Canaan, and then there's post-migration Abraham into Haran and Canaan. So the focus is different in both of these periods.
And what we're going to be discussing is pre-migration to Canaan.
So a little bit about Abraham's history. Like we've gathered some of these sources. Like we looked at the Torah, we looked at the Book of Jubilees, and there's one specific section in the Midrash, which is called the Genesis Rabbah or Bereshit Rabbah. Bereshit just means Genesis. Torah says that in Genesis 11:15 and Nehemiah 9, it says that Abram was from the land of Ur of the Chaldeans, and we have like our first difference about Abram's life. Like, so the Quran says in chapter 6 verse 74 that his father's name is Azar, and the Torah says that his father's name is Terah, and I think that name is also repeated in Genesis Rabbah and the Book of Jubilees.
Yes.
So Terah.
And in the Book of Jubilees, we also have the name of Abraham's mother, which was Edna. And something that I found just as a point of interest, something that I found about this Ur of the Chaldeans, the place where this is versus where they migrated to in Haran, this is 700 miles away. And I found this so interesting because there's argumentation with some of the scholarship who says like that's a huge distance, and they try to find different areas that this may have been. And for reference, this is where modern day Iraq is versus where the Levant area. But archaeology has found evidence for idols in this area, so the potential exists for this to actually be the truth or the actual place, and them to actually have migrated 700 miles. That's just crazy to me.
Yeah,
Can you
that is
imagine
crazy.
700 miles with like all these people?
Yeah,
It's
no,
just that's a lot.
yeah, and in those times.
Yeah. And with
There's no
just
moving company for them to call
no.
to, so they have to
And
pack
then just
everything.
imagine you're a caravan with like all of your family, like kid, like that's a lot. Anyway,
Okay, and this is where we also find out in Genesis where Lot is named as a nephew of Abram. So Lot is the son of Haran, which is same as the name of the place. But Haran dies, and we're going to discuss how Haran dies later on. So Lot then travels with Abraham whenever he leaves for Canaan and Haran. Which brings us to the point about Abraham, who Abraham is teaching to. So this is pre-migration. So Abraham is teaching to this community in Ur, whether or not it's the same tribe or it's whatever, maybe it's like several tribes or different people. We don't know because it's not really mentioned. But what we do know is that there is a focus on his father and the household of his father. So there's a verse from the Quran. This is chapter 19, verses from 42 to 45. So I'll just read a little bit. And it says, "O my father, why do you worship that which neither hears nor sees?" So this is him, trying to reason with him. In chapter 21, talks about that he also talks to like the larger community. So he says, "Do you worship instead of Allah that which does not benefit you at all or harm you?"
so in Genesis Rabbah, there is a narrative about the smashing of the idols, and Abraham's father left him, I guess, over the idols. And Abraham goes in and he smashes them all with a hammer. And then he takes the hammer and he puts it, he smashes them all except for the largest one, and he puts it in the hand of the largest one. And whenever his father comes back, his father asks him what happened, and he tells him maybe he attacked them. And his father, he said, are they sentient at all? He said, do your ears not hear what your mouth is saying? Like, you don't make any sense, son. And Abraham is like, so why do you worship them then? Like,
Which I find
I love
endlessly
that.
that endlessly amusing. So there's also this narrative in Jubilees in chapter 12, and he's talking to his father, and he's basically saying the same things about, well, what benefit do you get from these? They can't talk back. So it just reads, what help and profit have we from these idols which thou dost worship, and before which thou dost bow thyself? For there is no spirit in them, for they are dumb forms and a misleading of the heart. So he's really calling his father out. Like, I don't think it's with anger, it's just with that father-son relationship. Like, why are you doing this? Like, this idol has nothing to offer you. Why are you bowing down to something that you created with your own hands, basically?
Listen, nothing will humble you like your children, I promise you.
Mm. Well, you can be authority on that.
Yeah.
I'm not. So you see him reasoning with his father. So he's talking to his father. He's talking to his community. Then there's in chapter 21. Let me just quickly read something. So there's a few verses. So chapter 21, verses 52 onwards. Remember when he questioned his father and his people, what are these statues to which you are so devoted? They replied, we found our forefathers worshipping them. So really no good reason for them other than following of the tradition. He responded, indeed, you and your forefathers have been clearly astray. They asked, have you come to us with the truth, or is this a joke? He replied, in fact, your Lord is the Lord of the heavens and the earth, who created them. And to that I bear witness. And so there's this conversation being had with with the larger group, like especially in the Quran. So he's shown to be talking to more than just his family.
Yes.
And then he goes on this introspective journey. And so this is chapter 6, verses 74 onwards. Okay. And remember when Abraham said to his father Azar, do you take idols as gods? It is clear to me that you and your people are entirely misguided. Again, having this conversation with his father. We also showed Abraham the wonders of the heavens and the earth, so he would be sure in faith. So Abraham is said to have had more wisdom in his life than people around him, right? We also showed Abraham the wonders of the heavens and the earth, so he would be sure in faith. When the night grew dark upon him, he saw a star and said, this is my Lord. But when it is said, he said, I do not love things that set. Then when he saw the moon rising, he said, this one is my Lord. But when it disappeared, he said, if my Lord does not guide me, I will certainly be one of the misguided people. Then when he saw the sun shining, he said, this must be my Lord. It is the greatest. But again, when it set, he declared, O my people, I totally reject whatever you associate with Allah in worship. I have turned my face towards the one who has originated the heavens and the earth, being upright, and I am not one of the polytheists. So here you can see that Abraham is sort of going on this introspective journey, and he's really reasoning with himself like, okay, these are the sort of idols that the people are worshipping around him. So he's talking about some specifics here. And then the whole smashing of the idol things happen.
I think that this is a great, Abraham was a critical thinker,
Yes.
right? And so whenever he reasoned these things, he could always find something that was greater or something that could overtake. And so
Yeah.
him expressing this to them and giving them these reasons why this can't possibly be your God. You can't worship this. He's giving them the tools.
And we're going to see
Right?
some of this in when we talk about his conversation with Nimrod.
Yeah.
So, okay, so then Laura already mentioned the smashing of the idols, but there's also, which is similar to what is in the Quran. And this is literally I think this is your favorite bit as well about Abram, and my favorite bit about Abram. So in the Quran, something goes like this. Then he said to, so this is from chapter 21, verses 57 onwards. Then he said to himself, by Allah, I will surely plot against your idols after you have turned your backs and gone away. So he's not really with the program of being a
Right.
polytheist and an idol worshipper. So he smashed them into pieces, except the biggest of them, so they might turn to it for answers. They protested, who dared do this to our gods? It must be an evildoer. Some said, we have heard a young man called Abram speaking ill of them. They demanded, bring him before the eyes of the people so that they may witness his trial. They asked, was it you who did this to our gods, O Abram? He replied sarcastically, no, this one, the biggest of them, did it. So ask them if they can talk. So they came back to their senses, saying to one another, you yourselves are truly the wrongdoers. Then they quickly regressed to their original mindset, arguing, you already know that those idols cannot talk. And this is what we see. How it differs from the Genesis Rabbah is that in Genesis Rabbah, he concocts this story about a woman bringing some flour as an offering to one of the idols. And he's painting this picture that the idols fight him amongst themselves that who gets to eat first. And then the biggest one has this hammer or club in his hand. And he's saying that this one said that I'm going to eat first. And then he smashed all the others.
Find it interesting that they're like these little, it's like we know that there's like a little punny, or he was like making these like quips or whatever. Like he was basically insulting them and kind of condescending to them. And they were perceiving this in both of these stories, and they were getting angry. And in both of these stories, it's a different narrative, but it's the same way, right? He has the same manner of poking fun at them in a way. But trying to make them think, you know.
Trying to make them critically think about what really are they doing. And I mean, of course he wasn't wrong in doing any of that, but because smashing idols doesn't really hurt anything. Like it's not really hurting anybody other than their feelings or their preconceived notions about who God is.
Do you know, if you were to today, which I'm not going to name any names and I'm not going to name what it is, but there is a certain symbolic, I'm going to stop short of calling it an idol, but you know, there's a certain symbol that a certain Abrahamic group is very fond of. And can you imagine if someone went and they were breaking these, as the Quran tells us someone will? Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. But can you imagine the rage and the rejection that's going to come?
Well, I think I can imagine the rage because we've seen the rage.
Well, you see how they rejected him, and they rejected him telling them, hey, this isn't real. This can't do anything for you. Why are you worshiping this?
Yeah.
You know?
True. And then we see part of the conversation in front of the people. We think that from within the Quran, this conversation is happening in front of Nimrod. But then there is something that happens. So Abram's father in Midrash, in Genesis Rabbah 38, Terah is the one that hands him over to Nimrod. And then they have a conversation.
So, well, what I find interesting here is you know, his father turns him over to Nimrod. However, there is a point whenever they all migrate together. So, because his father was in Haran with them. So I find that a little interesting. So
could he have come later?
No, I think they all went together. And as a matter of fact, whenever we talk about this whole event, I'll show you about the brother. Right. But he turns him over to Nimrod, who was the king of Babylon. And just to insert here, one of the things that I find interesting about this narrative is it almost mirrors the narrative in Daniel with the 3 Hebrew children and Nebuchadnezzar, because, you know, Nebuchadnezzar was also a king of Babylon, and you'll see why in just a moment.
Repeating of history.
Right. So the story is what happens with his father. He says, he hands him over to Nimrod, and Nimrod says to Abraham, let us bow down to the fire. And Abraham said to him, let us better bow down to water that extinguishes fire. And Nimrod said to him, all right, let us bow down to water. And he said to him, if so, let us bow down to the clouds that bear the water. And he said to him, all right, let us bow down to the clouds. He said to him, if so, let us bow down to the wind that scatters the clouds. He said to him, all right, let us bow down to the wind. He said to him, better let us bow down to a person who can withstand the wind. He said to him, you are saying mere words. I bow down only to fire. I will cast you into it and let that God to whom you bow down come down and rescue you from it. Haran was there, which this was his brother, and he was conflicted. He said, either way, I will know what to do. If Abraham is victorious, I will say I'm with Abraham. And if Nimrod is victorious, I will say I am with Nimrod. And we're going to put a pin in that.
Yes.
So what happens is Abraham is basically thrown into this fiery furnace, hence the parallel, the Hebrew children in the book of Daniel. But the fire was cooled, and Abraham saw no harm from this fire. Now, what happened with his brother, who was watching this event to see which side he was going to be on? He says to, whenever Nimrod says to him, "With whom are you?" He says to him, "I'm with Abraham." And they took him and cast him into the fire, and he was burned. It's a little kind of graphic, so I'm not going to read it verbatim, but this is what's interesting. It says he emerged and died in the presence of Terah, his father. So he survived being in the fire to come out of the fire, and who knows what state he was in, but died in front of his father. So this is what happened in the Midrash.
So in the Quran, there's not much dialogue between Nimrod and Abraham. But there is one specific thing, and I'm going to read that from chapter 2. It's just one verse. Chapter 2, verse 258. Are you, O Prophet, not aware of the one who argued with Abraham about his Lord because Allah had granted him kingship? So clearly talking about some king, but not named. So remember when Abraham said, my Lord is the one who has power to give life and cause death. He argued, I too have the power to give life and cause death. Abraham challenged him, Allah causes the sun to rise from the east, so make it rise from the west. And so the disbeliever was dumbstruck, and Allah does not guide the wrongdoing people. So this is how the verse ends, really. We know that this is something different, but Nimrod is really being challenged for his position and for his claims in both. So over there, he's saying that he really bows down to the fire. Over here, he's saying that he has the power to do something to bring life and cause death. Of course, he's probably just referring to his might and bearing children with women. But what Abraham is pointing to is something greater. He's not just talking about procreating, and he's not just talking about the action of unaliving someone. He's talking about the death the cycle that we go through of life and death, right? And so I find that this difference a little interesting. And then in the Quran, it talks about Abraham being thrown into the fire. So the community is really pushing for it. And they said, burn him and support your gods if you are to act. So they start, this is chapter 21, verse 68. So they start feeling threatened by Abraham's ideas because they're set in their ways. They're set in their traditions of bowing down to these idols. And because Abraham is bringing real rational challenge to the idea of bowing down to the idols. And then in verse 69, God is telling us, we said, O fire, be cool, and safety upon Abraham. So the fire does not affect Abraham at all. And then the next verse 70 says, they had sought to harm him, but we made them the worst losers. So basically, it's just talking about them not being guided. So because they were persisting in their disbelief. You'll find that in chapter 2, in the beginning, it talks about persisting in disbelief. And so there's a theme of people being talked about who are persisting in disbelief. And then it talks about, then we delivered him along with Lot to the land we had showered with blessings for all people. Now, this is where we talk about how they traveled to Canaan and Haran. But before we do that, there's a difference in Genesis Rabbah's telling of events about what happened to Haran, and the book of Jubilees talking about what happened to Haran, the brother, the father of Lot.
So we have one narrative, like I said earlier, put a pin in it. But whenever we go to the book of Jubilees, it says that Abraham set fire to this idol,
the house
shop,
of the idols.
shop, or the house of the idols.
Yeah.
And then the brother runs in trying to save the idols, and he dies in the fire trying to save the idols. So we know he died by fire, right? And I'm not sure about the history there, but it's just an interesting difference. He died by fire, just which fire?
Yeah. So it's interesting that even within the Jewish scriptures, there's these differences of stories. And I mean, we will talk about something in the Quran which people probably later in some of the episodes, and we're going to come back to this and we're going to reference this, and I mean, amongst other things. But it is interesting, though, that there are Jewish sources that actually disagree about what happened to Haran. But what is not disagreeing is that he died by fire.
Where did we find where Gabriel was sent to cool the
To
fire?
cool the fire?
Yeah, where?
Okay, so this is in the Gate of Unity. This is from chapter
Yeah,
22,
that's what it
line
was.
50. This may be illustrated by the fact that it was the angel Gabriel who offered to save Abraham, and similarly by the fact that it was Gabriel who cooled the coals. So we're now moving into talking about Abraham leaving for Canaan and stopping in Haran on the way.
Well, the Quran tells that the father, whenever Abraham was giving, not really giving him grief, but he was really trying to. It was a mercy, honestly, that he was trying to like persuade his father and show his father like the error of this idol worship. But his father was more or less like, "Do you reject our gods or our traditions?" And he tells Abraham to get away from him for a long time, and
Yeah.
which, mind you, Abraham had just like smashed up all his idols and like trashed
Yeah.
his income too. So I'm sure that there was like it was a little bit of a stressor. But something that in the narrative, whenever you're looking across the plug your ears because I'm going to say Abrahamic religions. When you're looking across the Abrahamic religions at this timeline, there's definitely in Midrash, and I think also in Torah, the father travels with them to Haran, but he doesn't. After, like, whenever Abraham goes to Mamre or Canaan, he doesn't go with him there. And in fact, it says that leaving Haran was whenever he left his father's house. But and that may have been whenever he got married. I'm not entirely certain.
But then basically what we really see is that up to this point, Abraham is, arguing with the polytheists who are engaged in idol worship. He's not really focusing too much on the practice or the rituals or whatever teachings. The teaching is only one specific thing. Don't worship idols, worship the creator of the heavens and the earth. So he's really battling with them on this. But then we see a change. The change is post-migration. And then we start really seeing what practices are being described for Abraham following this.
So
I suppose maybe it would be a better way to say that it was the tradition that he set rather than a specific religion, because we don't know whether these were commands from God that he was following or whether he was already doing these things.
right, so he was coming out of a world that was like, I mean, obviously saturated with idol worship, and
Yeah.
he was trying to reason with. To me, I feel like the most important relationship in that was the one with him and his father, where he's really trying to reason with him.
Yeah.
And I think you can really see kind of in the Book of Jubilees, you can see that this wasn't a contentious relationship. He was respectful to his father, and he was really trying to show him,
Mm.
and he was really teaching worship, recognition and worship of one God. Leave idolatry, recognize this one creator. And there wasn't a structured legal system. There wasn't like what came with Moses, right? This was really foundational and really building, like you said, it was tradition. There were things, though, that he required in his household, obviously, monotheism and prayer. Circumcision comes later, but that became a thing. And one of the things that I find interesting is whenever we talk about righteousness and we talk about justice and things like that in this, where there's no legal system in place,
Yeah.
this is following that internal compass that we all have, right?
I think the word we use is fitra
It's
in
fitra. Yeah.
Arabic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just find that interesting.
So I think this would be a good point to stop, because next we're going to talk about Ishmael and Isaac and a little bit about Lot as well. Because I think some of these things are sort of interconnected, and I think it would be a good point to just make a whole episode of this. And we're going to focus on some of this covenantal things in the next episode. But really, what the takeaway should be here is that Abram only taught one specific idea about God. He's not talking about that he's this tribal God. He's not talking about any of the Trinity. Like, we don't see any of these things in any of the teachings that we can find. Certainly not in the Quran. So his teaching remained about this one specific God that he was worshipping, and he was telling everybody else to worship, and rejecting polytheism and rejecting idol worship. And it's a little difficult not to do the comparison, but really there's only one specific religion that says that God is for everybody,
Well,
not tribal, and God is
yeah.
not right now.
Yeah.
And we say that we worship the God of Abram.
Yeah, because the central message was like really simple. There's one creator alone who deserves worship. Idols are powerless, and we don't worship creations, and that includes men.
Okay, with that, we will say goodbye to this episode, and we shall see you in the next one. Assalamu alaikum.